"Stupid illiterate," shouted the millionaire when the waitress couldn't read the name of the French wine. But what she said made him break down in tears. The clink of fine crystal and the hushed murmur of wealthy patrons filled the air at Lumiere, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants. Autumn Hayes balanced a tray of champagne flutes with practiced ease, her movements graceful, despite the fatigue tugging at her limbs. At 28, she looked older than her years, not in her appearance, which remained striking with her amber eyes and chestnut hair pulled back in a severe bun, but in the way she carried herself, with the weathered dignity of someone who had shouldered responsibilities far beyond her age. Table 7 needs their check, and Table 12 is complaining about the temperature of their Bordeaux, hissed Marco, the floor manager, as he swept past her. "And for God's sake, smile more, these people pay enough to see happy faces." Autumn nodded, forcing her lips to curve upward, 8 hours into her double shift. Her cheeks ached from the effort, but she needed this job, needed the tips and the steady paycheck that kept a roof over her head and paid for her adoptive mother's medications. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice soft but clear. Autumn had mastered the art of being simultaneously visible and invisible in spaces like these, present enough to anticipate needs, absent enough not to disturb the illusion that the wealthy occupied a different world entirely as she moved between tables. Autumn's mind drifted to Beverly, the woman who had raised her after her biological mother died in childbirth. The doctors said the Alzheimer's was progressing faster now. Just yesterday, in a rare moment of lucidity, Beverly had gripped Autumn's hand with surprising strength. "The box in my closet," she had whispered, her eyes suddenly clear and urgent. "Behind the old photo albums. You need to see it, Autumn, before I forget everything." In the box, Autumn had found a small gold medallion with the initials BS engraved on its face and newspaper clippings about Bradford Sterling, the business magnate whose face frequently graced the financial pages. What connection could Beverly, a retired waitress who had never ventured beyond the boroughs, possibly have to one of New York's wealthiest men? "More water, please." The curt request snapped Autumn back to the present. She refilled glasses, cleared plates, and moved with mechanical efficiency through the restaurant's elegant maze. By 10 o'clock, her lower back throbbed, but the worst of the dinner rush had passed. That's when Marco caught her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. The Sterling party just arrived, private dining room. His eyes narrowed. "The old man himself is here. Don't screw this up." Autumn's heart skipped. Bradford Sterling. Here, the coincidence felt almost cosmic. After discovering those clippings, she adjusted her uniform and headed toward the private room with an extra bottle of sparkling water. The room hushed as she entered. Bradford Sterling sat at the head of the table, his silver hair immaculately styled, his tailored suit worth more than Autumn's annual salary. At 65, he commanded the space with the confidence of a man who had spent a lifetime being obeyed. Beside him sat a striking woman in her 30s, diamonds glittering at her throat. His fiancée, Vanessa, if the gossip columns were accurate. Around them were business associates, all men in similar suits, though none carried themselves with Sterling's authority. "We're celebrating," announced Sterling, his voice carrying the refined edge of elite education. 40 years since Sterling Enterprises was founded. Bring us your finest champagne." Autumn nodded and returned moments later with an ice bucket containing a bottle of Dom Pérignon. As she presented it to Sterling, he barely glanced at her. The woman beside him, however, assessed Autumn with cool, calculating eyes. "And the Taketsuru pure malt for Mr. Cooper," Sterling continued, gesturing to an older man with kind eyes who sat 2 seats away. "He prefers Japanese whiskey to champagne." Autumn froze. The whiskey name, a jumble of foreign syllables, stuck in her throat. "The take," she began, feeling heat rise to her cheeks as she stumbled over the pronunciation. Sterling's expression darkened. "The Taketsuru pure malt," he repeated, emphasizing each syllable with growing irritation. When Autumn hesitated again, his patience snapped. "For God's sake, stupid illiterate, can't they hire more competent staff in this place?" The room fell silent. Autumn stood perfectly still, her face burning with humiliation as tears threatened to spill. She blinked them back furiously. She would not give him the satisfaction. "I'll bring it right away, sir," she managed, her voice barely audible as she turned to leave. Sterling's sleeve rode up slightly, revealing his wrist. There, on his pale skin, was a birthmark, a perfect crescent moon, identical to the one Autumn had carried on her own wrist since birth. Her breath caught in her throat. The medallion, the newspaper clippings, Beverly's cryptic hints about Autumn's mother, the birthmark. It couldn't be coincidence. Something snapped inside her then. A lifetime of questions without answers, of working herself to exhaustion to care for the woman who had raised her, of being looked through rather than seen by people like Bradford Sterling. Before she could stop herself, Autumn turned back. The room was still watching her, perhaps expecting an outburst or tears. Instead, she approached Sterling with quiet dignity and leaned down, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "I'm Lily Hayes' daughter," she whispered, watching his face for any reaction. "The daughter you abandoned 20 years ago when she worked as a housekeeper in your mansion, when she got pregnant." Sterling's face drained of color. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. His eyes darted to her wrist where her sleeve had pulled back, revealing her own crescent birthmark. "That's not possible," he whispered, but the shock in his eyes told a different story. He recognized something in her face, features that mirrored another woman from long ago. "Autumn." Marco's voice cut through the tension. "You're needed in the kitchen now." With one last look at Sterling's ashen face, Autumn straightened and walked out, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Behind her, she heard the woman, Vanessa, asking what was wrong, and Sterling dismissing her concern with a brusque, "Nothing," but it wasn't nothing. Autumn had just lit a match to a past that had been carefully buried for decades, and as she pushed through the kitchen doors, she knew with absolute certainty that her life had irrevocably changed. What she didn't see was Mitchell Cooper, the kindly older man for whom she'd been fetching whiskey. Watching her with a mixture of recognition and dread, he alone knew the full truth of what had happened all those years ago, a truth he had helped conceal. And now, as he observed Bradford Sterling's shaken expression, Mitchell realized that the carefully constructed lies were beginning to unravel. The reckoning had begun. Mitchell Cooper sat alone in his home office, nursing a glass of the same Japanese whiskey he'd ordered earlier that evening. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the bottom drawer of his desk, a drawer he hadn't touched in years. "Damn it all," he muttered, retrieving a worn manila folder. Inside were documents he'd promised himself he would destroy, yet could never bring himself to part with. Photographs of a young woman with laughing eyes, bank statements showing modest monthly transfers to one Beverly Hayes, and a birth certificate for Autumn Lily Hayes. The girl at the restaurant was unmistakable. Lily's high cheekbones and determined chin, but with Bradford's amber eyes, Mitchell had recognized her instantly, though he'd prayed this day would never come. His phone buzzed. Bradford Sterling's name flashed on the screen. "I need you at my house now." Bradford's voice was ice cold, controlled in a way that Mitchell knew was more dangerous than any outburst. "It's almost midnight, Brad." "Now, Mitchell." 30 minutes later, Mitchell stood in Bradford's study. The business magnate paced before the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan's lights twinkling below like fallen stars. "That waitress," Bradford began without preamble. "She claims to be Lily Hayes' daughter." Mitchell maintained a carefully neutral expression. "Lily, your former housekeeper." "Don't play dumb," Bradford snapped. "She said I abandoned her mother when she was pregnant." "That's impossible." Lily left without a word. "Diana told me she ran off with some bartender." Mitchell swallowed hard, remembering Diana Sterling's cold calculation. 28 years ago, Bradford's now-deceased wife had discovered her husband's affair with the housekeeper and taken swift, merciless action. "I need you to investigate this girl," Bradford continued, discreetly. "If she's trying to extort money, and if she's telling the truth," Mitchell interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. Bradford paused, something vulnerable flashing across his face. "Lily never told me she was pregnant." "Would it have mattered?" Mitchell asked quietly. "You were married to Diana. The merger with her father's company had just gone through." Bradford turned away. "Just find out everything about this Autumn Hayes, everything." Across town, Autumn unlocked the door to her small apartment, her hands still shaking from the confrontation at the restaurant. The night nurse rose from the couch as she entered. "She's been asking for you," the nurse said. "Had a good day." More lucid than usual. Autumn nodded gratefully, paying the nurse before heading to Beverly's room. The elderly woman lay propped against pillows, her once robust frame now bird-like under the blankets. Despite her illness, her eyes brightened when Autumn entered. "There's my girl," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Did you find the box?" Autumn sat on the edge of the bed. "I found it, Beverly. The medallion. The newspaper clippings about Bradford Sterling." She took a deep breath. "I saw him tonight at the restaurant." Beverly's eyes widened. "You didn't—" "I told him who I was." Autumn reached for Beverly's hand. "I need to know the truth. Was my mother really his housekeeper? Was he my father?" Beverly closed her eyes, the weight of decades of secrecy visible in the lines of her face. "Your mother, Lily. She was like a daughter to me. We worked together at a diner before she got the job at the Sterling mansion." She paused, the effort of organizing her fragmented memories evident. She was so excited about the baby. "Your father's baby," she was going to tell him. But then what? Autumn prompted when Beverly's voice trailed off. "Diana Sterling found out. She fired Lily, told her Bradford wouldn't want her or the baby." Beverly's gaze hardened. "Threatened her. Said if Lily ever contacted Bradford, she'd make sure Lily never worked again in this city. But the medallion? Bradford gave it to Lily. It was his father's. He loved her. In his way." Beverly's voice grew fainter. "But not enough to choose her over his perfect life." Autumn felt tears burn her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because you deserve to be loved for yourself, not as some rich man's mistake." Beverly squeezed her hand weakly. "And I was afraid. Afraid you'd go looking for him and he'd reject you. Or worse, that you'd find him, and I'd lose you to his world." Suddenly, Beverly's expression changed, confusion clouding her eyes. "Who are you?" she asked, the moment of clarity gone. "Where's my Autumn?" "I'm here," Autumn whispered, heartbreaking as the familiar fog of Alzheimer's descended once more. "I'm right here." After ensuring Beverly was comfortable and sleeping, Autumn retreated to her tiny bedroom. From beneath her mattress, she pulled out the sealed envelope she discovered in Beverly's box. A letter addressed to Bradford Sterling in her biological mother's handwriting, dated shortly before her death. Autumn traced the letters of her mother's handwriting, tempted to open it, but something held her back. This letter wasn't meant for her. It was her mother's words to her father. If Bradford Sterling truly was her father, she wanted to hear his explanation first. Tyler Sterling glared at his father across the breakfast table in their Upper East Side penthouse. At 45, Tyler had his mother's sharp features and calculating mind, with none of the warmth Bradford occasionally displayed. "You've been distracted since that dinner last night," Tyler observed, scrolling through financial reports on his tablet. "The Asian markets are fluctuating, and you're daydreaming." Bradford looked up from his untouched coffee. "Mitchell is looking into something for me. Personnel matter." "Personnel." Tyler's eyes narrowed. "The waitress who upset you, father? If you're letting a server's incompetence disturb you, drop it, Tyler." Bradford's tone left no room for argument. Later that morning, Bradford found himself standing before a photograph of Diana in his office. His wife of 30 years, dead now for 5, she stared back with the same imperious gaze that had intimidated board members and society matrons alike. "Did you know?" he whispered to the photograph. "Did you drive Lily away because she was pregnant?" The question had haunted him through a sleepless night. He remembered Lily's sudden disappearance, how Diana had handed him a resignation letter, explaining that the young housekeeper had found a better opportunity elsewhere. He'd believed it, or forced himself to believe it, despite the letter's formal tone being so unlike Lily. He'd searched for her, quietly at first, then desperately, but New York City could swallow people whole, and after months without a trace, he'd surrendered to the reality that Lily Hayes had chosen to leave his life forever, or so he had thought. Bradford's hand moved unconsciously to his wrist, to the crescent birthmark that matched the one he'd glimpsed on the waitress's arm, his family's mark, a sterling trait documented through generations. His father had it, as did Tyler, and apparently, so did Autumn Hayes. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Sterling, Mitchell Cooper is on line 1. Bradford straightened, composing himself. "Put him through. I have preliminary information," Mitchell said without greeting. Autumn Hayes, 28 years old. Raised by Beverly Hayes, a retired waitress with no biological relation. Never finished high school because she had to work full-time when Beverly developed early-onset dementia. Now Beverly has Alzheimer's, terminal stage. Bradford felt something tighten in his chest. And her mother. A pause. Lily Hayes died in childbirth. The birth certificate lists no father. The words hit Bradford like a physical blow. Lily was dead, had been dead for 28 years. While he'd built his empire, married Diana, raised Tyler, Lily had died bringing their child into the world. Their child, Brad. Mitchell's concerned voice came through the speaker. There's more, the timing matches, and that birthmark. Keep looking, Bradford interrupted, his voice strained. And Mitchell? Not a word of this to anyone, especially Tyler. As he ended the call, Bradford didn't notice his son standing in the doorway, eyes narrowed in suspicion, having heard enough to know that his father was hiding something potentially threatening to the Sterling legacy and to his inheritance. This is ridiculous, Autumn muttered to herself, staring up at the brick building in Brooklyn's Bushwick neighborhood. A weathered sign read, "Second Start, Adult Literacy Program." After last night's confrontation with Bradford Sterling, she'd nearly called in sick to her day job at the local coffee shop. But Beverly's medication wasn't going to pay for itself. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marco. "Don't bother coming in tonight, mister. Sterling complained about you." Autumn's stomach dropped. She'd lost her highest-paying job, the evening shifts that came with generous tips from wealthy patrons. She closed her eyes, fighting back tears of frustration. This was exactly why she'd avoided confrontation her whole life. People like Bradford Sterling could destroy her livelihood with a word. But now, survival meant improving her skills. If she could read better, maybe she could get an office job with regular hours and benefits. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The classroom was modest but welcoming, with motivational posters and a small library of books arranged by reading level. A few other adults sat at tables, some looking as nervous as Autumn felt. First time, Autumn turned to find a woman about her age with bright blue hair and intelligent eyes. She wore jeans and a casual blazer over a t-shirt that read, "Reading is rebellion." "Is it that obvious?" Autumn asked. The woman smiled. "I'm Skylar. I run this program." She extended her hand. "Autumn." She shook Skylar's hand, noticing her firm grip and the lack of judgment in her eyes. "I can read," she clarified quickly. "Basic stuff, but I struggle with bigger words, complex texts. I never finished high school." "That's what we're here for," Skylar said. "No judgment, just progress." For the next hour, Skylar worked with Autumn, assessing her reading level and explaining the program. Autumn found herself relaxing as Skylar shared stories of other adults who'd improved their literacy skills later in life. "My mom got sick when I was 14, Autumn explained as they reviewed a simple paragraph. "I had to drop out to work. By the time she was stable, I was already supporting us." Skylar nodded, sympathy in her eyes. "My mom wasn't in the picture much either. My dad and I didn't connect until a few years ago." Something about Skylar seemed familiar, but Autumn couldn't place it. There was an intensity to her that reminded Autumn of herself, someone who had fought for everything she had. "Same time Thursday?" Skylar asked as they wrapped up. Autumn nodded. "I'll be here." "She's in a literacy program in Brooklyn," Mitchell reported, placing a folder on Bradford's desk. "Teaching assistant says she's a quick learner despite limited formal education." Bradford nodded absently, his fingers tracing the edge of an old photograph he'd dug out of storage. Lily Hayes on her first day at the Sterling mansion, her smile bright and unguarded. "You haven't told Tyler," Mitchell observed. "No," Bradford's voice was firm. "Not until I know for certain." Mitchell hesitated. The birthmark, her age, her mother's name. "What more certainty do you need?" "DNA," Bradford said. "I need to know beyond any doubt. And if she is your daughter..." Bradford looked up, his expression unreadable. "Then I have 28 years to make up for." In the Sterling penthouse, Tyler paced the living room while Vanessa lounged on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. "You're overreacting," she said without looking up. "So your father is investigating some waitress. Maybe she stole silverware." "No," Tyler shook his head. "I know my father. This is personal." At 35, Vanessa Monroe had spent the past 3 years carefully cultivating her relationship with Bradford Sterling. The engagement ring on her finger, a flawless 5-carat diamond, represented not just a promise of marriage but access to the sterling fortune, anything threatening that deserved her attention. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, finally setting down her phone. Tyler's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Find out what Mitchell Cooper is investigating. He trusts you." The devoted fiancé concerned about her future father-in-law. Vanessa nodded. Already planning her approach, she'd perfected the art of appearing genuinely concerned while extracting information. It was a skill that had served her well in her climb from middle-class obscurity to the pinnacle of New York society. 2 days later, Autumn stood outside Beverly's doctor's office, trying to process what she'd just been told. The Alzheimer's was progressing faster than expected. 6 months, maybe less. The recommended full-time memory care would cost more than Autumn could possibly afford, especially now that she'd lost her restaurant job, lost in thought. She didn't notice the black town car until it pulled alongside her. The window lowered to reveal Mitchell Cooper's kind face. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm Mitchell Cooper. We met briefly at the restaurant." Autumn tensed. "I'm not interested in hush money if that's why you're here." Mitchell's expression remained gentle. "No money, just a conversation, please," against her better judgment. Autumn got into the car. Mitchell directed the driver to a quiet cafe several blocks away. "I've known Bradford Sterling for 40 years, Mitchell began once they were seated. "I was there when he met your mother." Autumn's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "Beverly told me she worked for him." "She did." For 2 years, Mitchell's eyes grew distant with memory. Bradford was already married to Diana, but he and Lily, they fell in love. It was genuine, at least on his part. Not genuine enough to acknowledge his own child, Autumn said bitterly. Mitchell looked at her directly. Bradford never knew Lily was pregnant. Diana discovered the affair, confronted Lily, and forced her to leave. She fabricated a resignation letter and told Bradford that Lily had found another job and left the city. Autumn's mind raced. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Bradford is a complicated man who's made many mistakes, but abandoning you knowing you existed wasn't one of them." Mitchell sighed. "He searched for Lily for months after she disappeared. How do you know all this?" Mitchell hesitated. "Lily was my second cousin. We weren't close, but we were family. I only learned she was pregnant after Diana had already forced her out. By then, the damage was done." Autumn stared at him in shock. "You're my relative, and you never reached out." "I made sure you and Beverly always had enough," Mitchell said quietly. "Those administrative errors at the diner where Beverly worked, that always seemed to work in her favor. The mysterious scholarship offer you received for high school that Beverly was too proud to accept. That was me." Autumn's mind flashed to the times when things mysteriously worked out just when they were most desperate. The landlord who suddenly found their rent payment when it had been lost. The insurance company that covered Beverly's early treatments despite policy limitations. "Diana held certain information over me," Mitchell continued. "Information that could have destroyed my father. And I thought you were better off with Beverly's love than caught in the Sterling family drama." Autumn stood abruptly. "I need to go." Mitchell didn't try to stop her, but as she reached the door, he called after her. "He has a collection of Japanese whiskeys. Taketsuru is his favorite because the name means bamboo crane. It reminded him of Lily's grace. He wasn't mocking your illiteracy that night. He was lost in memory." That evening, Bradford sat in his study examining old photographs. Pictures of Lily he'd kept hidden for decades. In one, she wore the small gold medallion he'd given her, his father's lucky charm. His phone rang. It was Skylar. "Dad, you'll never believe this." His youngest daughter's voice came through, excited. "There's this amazing woman in my literacy program. She's so determined, despite everything she's been through." As Skylar described her new student named Autumn, Bradford felt the air leave his lungs. His estranged daughter and his secret daughter had somehow found each other, forming a bond neither could possibly understand. The universe, it seemed, had a profound sense of irony. Autumn sat on the edge of her bed, the sealed envelope trembling in her hands. For days, she had carried her mother's letter to Bradford Sterling everywhere, unable to open it, yet unwilling to let it out of her sight. After Mitchell's revelations, she could no longer resist. Taking a deep breath, she carefully broke the seal and unfolded the yellowed pages. "My dearest Bradford, by the time you read this, If you ever do, I will be gone. The doctors tell me there are complications with my pregnancy. They don't think I'll survive the birth. I pray our child will. I wanted you to know that I never left by choice. Diana discovered our relationship and gave me an ultimatum. Leave immediately without a word to you, or she would ensure you lost everything. Your company, your reputation, even Tyler. She showed me the evidence she had gathered against you, legal documents that would have destroyed you. I couldn't be responsible for taking everything you worked for, even if it meant losing you. So I left, carrying our child with me. Beverly has promised to raise our baby if I don't survive. She's the closest thing to family I have left in this world. Please, if you ever find this letter, know that I loved you truly. And if our child survives, please look after them, not with money, but with the love and kindness I know exists beneath your ambition. Forever yours. Lily, tears streamed down Autumn's face. Her mother's handwriting grew shakier toward the end of the letter, as if she'd struggled to finish. 28 years had passed since these words were written. A lifetime during which Beverly had kept this letter, never delivering it but never destroying it either. The sound of Beverly's monitor brought Autumn back to the present. She tucked the letter into her pocket and went to check on her adoptive mother. Beverly was awake but confused, her eyes darting around the room frantically. "Who's there?" she called. "Lily, is that you?" Autumn sat beside her, taking her hand. "It's me, Beverly. It's Autumn." Beverly's gaze focused momentarily. "Autumn, my sweet girl." Her fragile hand reached for Autumn's face. "You look so much like your mother today." "I read her letter," Autumn said softly. "The one to Bradford Sterling." A flash of recognition crossed Beverly's face. "I should have given it to him. I was selfish. Wanted to keep you all to myself." "You weren't selfish," Autumn assured her, smoothing Beverly's thin white hair. "You saved me. You gave me a home, a life." Beverly's eyes filled with tears. "He should have known you. You deserved a father." "I had you," Autumn said firmly. That was enough. But later, as Beverly drifted back to sleep, Autumn wondered if that was true. How different would her life have been if Bradford Sterling had known about her? Would he have acknowledged her? Or would she have been an inconvenient truth, hidden away with payments and NDAs? The questions haunted her as she prepared for her literacy session with Skylar. "You seem distracted today," Skylar observed as they worked through a practice paragraph. Autumn sighed. "Sorry, my mom's not doing well, and I lost my evening job. Just a lot going on." Skylar's eyes softened with empathy. "I know what it's like to worry about a parent. My mom died when I was young, and my dad and I were estranged until recently." Autumn looked up, curious despite herself. "What changed?" "He did. I think," Skylar shrugged. "After his wife died, he reached out, said he wanted a relationship before it was too late." A small smile played on her lips. "He's still emotionally constipated, but he's trying." There was something about Skylar's candor that made Autumn feel safe. "My birth mom died when I was born," she found herself saying. "I just found out who my biological father is, but it's complicated." Skylar nodded, not pressing for details. "Family usually is. Listen, I know this is forward, but there's a part-time position opening up here, administrative stuff, helping with registrations. It doesn't pay much, but I'll take it," Autumn said quickly. "Thank you." As they continued the lesson, Autumn couldn't shake the feeling that Skylar was familiar somehow. It wasn't until they were packing up that she noticed the book on Skylar's desk, a biography of Bradford Sterling. The author photo on the back showed him younger, but with the same determined expression Autumn had glimpsed on Skylar's face when she spoke about her work. "Your father," Autumn said suddenly, pointing to the book. "It's Bradford Sterling, isn't it?" Skylar looked surprised, then nodded. "Not many people make that connection. I don't use his last name professionally." "How did you know?" Autumn's mind raced. Skylar was Bradford's daughter, her half-sister. "Just a guess?" "You mentioned he was emotionally distant, powerful. Half the men in Manhattan fit that description." Skylar laughed. "But, yeah, that's dear old Dad. We're finding our way, slowly." Autumn mumbled something about needing to catch her bus and fled, her heart pounding. She had a sister, a smart, kind sister who had no idea they shared the same father. At Sterling Tower, Mitchell entered Bradford's office with a thick folder. "I found her," he said without preamble. Lily's burial site, a simple grave in Queens. Bradford's face paled. All these years, there's more, Mitchell continued. I've been investigating financial irregularities in the company's accounts. Large sums diverted to offshore accounts. The trail leads to Tyler. Bradford's expression hardened. How much? Millions. It appears he's been covering gambling debts. High-stakes poker, mostly. Bradford pressed his fingers to his temples. Keep this between us for now. I need time to think. After Mitchell left, Bradford opened his desk drawer and removed the gold medallion that matched the one in Autumn's possession, a twin to the one he'd given Lily all those years ago. The Sterling family crest was worn but still visible on its surface. His phone rang. Vanessa. Darling, I'm worried about Tyler, she began without preamble. He seems convinced you're hiding something from him. Something about that waitress. Bradford's instincts sharpened. Tyler should focus on his own affairs, he replied carefully. That's what I told him, Vanessa said, her voice honey-sweet, but you know how he worries about the company's image. After ending the call, Bradford sat motionless, contemplating the pieces in play. Vanessa was probing for information, likely at Tyler's request. His son was growing suspicious, and Mitchell had uncovered evidence of his financial crimes. Meanwhile, his unknown daughter had connected with Skylar, creating an unexpected bond that could either heal or further fracture his splintered family. For a man who had built an empire by controlling every variable, Bradford Sterling suddenly found himself at the mercy of forces beyond his management. In a dimly lit bar across town, Tyler Sterling slammed his glass down. She's not telling me anything useful, he growled, glaring at his phone. His companion, a private investigator with a reputation for ethical flexibility, slid a folder across the table. Your father hired Mitchell Cooper to investigate an Autumn Hayes. 28 years old, no formal education, lives with her adoptive mother who has late-stage Alzheimer's. Tyler's eyes narrowed. What's her connection to my father? That's where it gets interesting, the investigator said. Her birth mother was Lily Hayes, your father's former housekeeper, the timing suggests. She's claiming to be his illegitimate daughter, Tyler finished, fury building in his chest. Another heir, another claim on what should rightfully be his. Find something on her. Everyone has secrets, skeletons, I don't care what it costs. As Tyler left the bar, he didn't notice the woman who had been sitting in the corner booth, now discreetly following him out. Skylar Sterling had recognized her half-brother's raised voice, and curious about his obvious agitation, had positioned herself to overhear his conversation. Now, as she watched him storm away, she wondered what connection the Autumn he'd mentioned could possibly have to the determined woman in her literacy program, and why her brother was so intent on finding something on her. There's nothing in her background, reported the private investigator, sliding a thin folder across the marble countertop of Tyler's kitchen. No criminal record, no suspicious financial activity, not even a parking ticket. Tyler paced his penthouse, the morning light casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. Everyone has something. Dig deeper. I did, the investigator countered. She works multiple jobs, pays her bills on time, spends most of her money on medical care for her adoptive mother. The woman's practically a saint. Then we create something, Tyler snapped. The investigator shifted uncomfortably, and Tyler softened his tone. I'm not asking you to frame her for murder. Just find someone who'll say she's tried this before, claiming to be some rich man's long-lost daughter. That's still $50,000, Tyler interrupted. Cash, no questions asked. The investigator hesitated, then nodded. I know someone who can help, a woman who specializes in creating pasts for people. She's worked with some of the best con artists in the city. Perfect. Tyler reached for his checkbook. Get it done before my father's birthday next week. He's been acting strangely, spending hours locked in his study with old photographs. I won't let some waitress with a sob story steal what's rightfully mine. Vanessa Monroe arrived at Bradford's office bearing lunch from his favorite sushi restaurant. At 35, she still turned heads with her model-like figure and calculated charm, but it was her strategic mind that had helped her rise from fashion assistant to fiancée of one of New York's wealthiest men. You missed our dinner with the Andersons last night, she said, arranging the takeout containers on Bradford's desk. Bradford barely looked up from his computer. Something came up. Something's been coming up a lot lately. Vanessa's voice remained pleasant. but her eyes sharpened. Is this about that waitress? Tyler mentioned she caused a scene at your anniversary dinner. Bradford's gaze flicked to her face. Tyler talks too much. He worries about you. We both do. Vanessa placed her hand over his. If someone's trying to take advantage of you, that's enough. Bradford pulled his hand away. My business is my business. Vanessa retreated smoothly, knowing when to push and when to withdraw. Of course, I just want to protect our future together. She gestured to the engagement ring on her finger, the same ring Diana had worn for 30 years. After she left, Bradford opened his desk drawer and removed a small velvet box. Inside was a DNA test kit he'd ordered days ago. He had Autumn's water glass from the restaurant. Mitchell had secured it before it could be washed. All he needed was to submit it along with his own sample. The results would arrive just before his 65th birthday celebration. By then, he would know with absolute certainty whether Autumn Hayes was his daughter. Skylar found Autumn shelving books in the Literacy Center's small library. In the 2 weeks since Autumn had started working part-time at the center, Skylar had grown increasingly fond of her, and increasingly suspicious about Tyler's interest in her. Hey, Skylar greeted her. How's your mom doing? Autumn's smile was tired but genuine. She had a good morning, remembered my name, asked for her favorite breakfast. The doctors say these moments will get rarer, but I treasure them when they happen. Skylar nodded, then hesitated. Listen, this might sound strange, but has anyone been asking questions about you lately? Or following you? Autumn's hand stilled on the book she was shelving. Why would you ask that? I overheard something, Skylar admitted. My brother talking about an Autumn, given your situation with finding your birth father. I got worried. Autumn carefully placed the last book on the shelf before turning to face Skylar. Your brother, Tyler Sterling. Skylar's eyes widened. You know who he is. I know who you both are. Autumn took a deep breath. Your father, Bradford Sterling. I have reason to believe he's also my father. The silence that followed was deafening. Skylar stared at Autumn, realization dawning in her eyes as she took in the details she'd overlooked. The amber eyes so like Bradford's, the determined set of the jaw, the crescent birthmark partially visible beneath Autumn's watchband. That's why Tyler was... Skylar trailed off. Was what? Autumn pressed. He was telling someone to find something on you. I think he sees you as a threat. Autumn laughed bitterly. A threat? I'm a waitress. Well, former waitress, with barely a high school education. What could I possibly threaten? His inheritance, Skylar said bluntly. Tyler's always been obsessed with the Sterling fortune. If you're Bradford's daughter, you have a claim. I don't want his money, Autumn insisted. I just wanted answers, to know where I came from. Skylar studied her, then nodded slowly. I believe you, but Tyler won't, and he's dangerous when he feels threatened. Mitchell Cooper sat alone in his car outside Beverly Hayes' modest apartment building. He'd been watching the place for hours, debating whether to go inside. The elderly woman inside was fading fast, taking with her the last first-hand knowledge of what had happened nearly 3 decades ago. His phone buzzed. A text from Bradford. Results come in tomorrow. Don't tell anyone. Mitchell sighed, starting his car. As he pulled away, he didn't notice the black sedan that had been parked across the street, or the man inside photographing his departure. Tyler burst into Vanessa's dressing room, brandishing his phone. Look what my investigator found. Mitchell Cooper has been visiting the old woman, Beverly Hayes. Vanessa examined the photo. Why would he do that? Because he's gathering evidence, Tyler seethed. My father's having a DNA test done. The results come tomorrow, just before his birthday party. Vanessa carefully applied her lipstick before responding. If she truly is his daughter, we need a contingency plan. Already working on it. Tyler's smile was cold. By the time I'm done, Autumn Hayes will be exposed as a calculating con artist who researched my father thoroughly before making her move. I've hired someone to create a paper trail. Previous attempts at blackmailing wealthy men with paternity claims. And if the DNA test confirms she's his daughter, Tyler's expression hardened. DNA can be contaminated. Results can be manipulated. I've spent my life preparing to take over Sterling Enterprises. I won't let some random girl from nowhere take what's mine. Vanessa studied her fiancé's future stepson. His desperation was obvious. And dangerous. What are you not telling me, Tyler? Why are you so afraid of a simple DNA test? Tyler avoided her gaze. The company's finances aren't as solid as they appear. I've had to reallocate funds to cover some personal investments that didn't pan out. You've been embezzling, Vanessa translated flatly. Borrowing, Tyler corrected. But if my father discovers it before I can replace the money, or worse, if he decides to split the inheritance, I'm finished. Vanessa calculated quickly. Her future was tied to the Sterling fortune. If Tyler went down, her carefully constructed plans would collapse with him. How much time do you need to cover your tracks? Months, at least, maybe a year. Then we need to make sure Bradford doesn't see those test results, Vanessa decided. And if he does, we need to be ready to discredit them, and her, completely. As they plotted, neither noticed the housekeeping staff member who had paused outside the door, duster in hand, listening to every word before quietly continuing down the hall. Toward Bradford Sterling's study, the Sterling ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and the jewelry of New York's elite. Bradford's 65th birthday celebration had drawn over 200 guests, politicians, celebrities, and business titans mingling over champagne and caviar. Bradford stood near the entrance, mechanically shaking hands and accepting congratulations, while his mind remained fixated on the email he'd received that morning. The DNA test results had arrived, confirming what he'd already suspected. Autumn Hayes was his daughter, a 99.9% match, irrefutable evidence that Lily had been carrying his child when she disappeared from his life. Quite the turnout, Mitchell murmured, appearing at Bradford's side. The mayor, 2 senators, and I spotted at least 3 Forbes list regulars. Bradford nodded absently. Have you seen Tyler? Holding court by the bar with Vanessa. They've been inseparable all evening. And our other guest? Mitchell glanced toward the door. Ms. Hayes hasn't arrived yet. Are you sure inviting her tonight was wise? Bradford's jaw tightened. She deserves to hear the truth from me directly, not through lawyers or press releases. I've spent 28 years in ignorance of her existence. I won't waste another day. Across the room, Tyler watched his father's intense conversation with Mitchell, his knuckles white around his champagne flute. The fabricated evidence against Autumn Hayes was ready. Testimonials from victims claiming she'd attempted similar paternity scams before. Falsified bank records showing suspicious deposits, even a former accomplice willing to testify about their schemes. She's here, Vanessa whispered, nodding toward the entrance. Autumn stood uncertainly at the edge of the ballroom, clearly uncomfortable in the simple black dress Skylar had helped her find for the occasion. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant knot, emphasizing her striking resemblance to the woman Bradford had loved decades ago. Let's move, Tyler muttered, straightening his tie, before my father makes a spectacle of himself. As they approached, Bradford spotted Autumn and broke away from his conversation with Mitchell, moving purposefully toward her. Skylar appeared at Autumn's side, having helped arrange her invitation and transportation to the event. The collision of all parties in the center of the ballroom created an immediate hush among the nearest guests. Ms. Hayes, Bradford began formally, his voice tight with emotion. Thank you for coming. Before Autumn could respond, Tyler stepped between them. Father, I need to speak with you. Privately, it's urgent. It can wait, Bradford replied, not taking his eyes off Autumn. It really can't. Tyler produced a folder from his jacket. I've discovered some disturbing information about Ms. Hayes that you need to see immediately. Bradford's expression hardened. Tyler, Mr. Sterling, Vanessa interjected smoothly. Perhaps we should take this discussion somewhere more private, for everyone's sake. The tension in the air was palpable. Nearby guests pretended not to listen while straining to catch every word. Fine, Bradford conceded. My study now. The group moved through the crowd toward Bradford's private study, adjacent to the ballroom, whispers following in their wake. Mitchell joined them, his face grave. Once inside, with the door firmly closed, Bradford turned to his son. What is the meaning of this interruption? Tyler thrust the folder toward his father. This woman is a con artist. She's done this before. Researched wealthy men, claimed to be their long-lost daughter, then demanded settlements. Autumn gasped. That's a lie. We have sworn statements, Vanessa added, her voice reasonable yet firm. From 3 other victims and a former accomplice of hers. Skylar moved to Autumn's side. This is absurd. I've worked with Autumn for weeks. She's never once mentioned money or settlements. Of course not, Tyler sneered. She's playing the long game. Befriending Skylar was just another way to infiltrate the family. Enough! Bradford's voice cut through the accusations. He turned to Autumn. Did you know I had a DNA test done? Autumn blinked in surprise. No. I had Mitchell secure a glass you used at the restaurant. I tested it against my own DNA. Bradford reached into his pocket and removed a folded paper. The results came this morning. You are my daughter. Tyler's face flushed crimson. Those results could be manipulated. I've seen enough, Mitchell interrupted. Stepping forward, his normally gentle demeanor had vanished, replaced by quiet resolve. I can't stand by any longer while you perpetuate these lies, Tyler. Mitchell turned to Bradford. There's something you need to know. Something I've kept hidden for decades. The room fell silent as Mitchell recounted the full story. Diana discovering Bradford's affair with Lily, forcing the young housekeeper to leave without revealing her pregnancy, threatening both Lily and Mitchell with evidence of financial improprieties that would have destroyed Bradford's business and sent Mitchell's father to prison. Diana made sure Lily disappeared, Mitchell explained, his voice heavy with long-carried guilt. When I discovered Lily had died in childbirth, I located Beverly and the baby, Autumn. I couldn't tell you without exposing Diana's actions, but I set up a trust to ensure they had the basics. I've watched over them from a distance all these years. Bradford stared at his oldest friend, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. You knew I had a daughter all this time. I thought I was protecting everyone, Mitchell said simply. I was wrong. Bradford turned to Tyler, his expression hardening. And these false accusations, these fabricated witnesses. Before Tyler could respond, Mitchell continued, his voice firm. There's more. I've discovered significant financial irregularities in the company accounts. Money being siphoned to offshore accounts. Millions of dollars. I traced it back to Tyler. He's been embezzling for years to cover gambling debts. The color drained from Tyler's face. That's absurd. I have the documentation, Mitchell interrupted. All of it. I've been gathering evidence for months. The room spun around Bradford, his son, a thief, his best friend, a keeper of devastating secrets, his late wife, a manipulative destroyer of lives, and before him stood the daughter he never knew existed, the living proof of his greatest love and his greatest failure. Bradford clutched his chest, a searing pain radiating down his left arm. I can't, he gasped, stumbling backward. Dad! Skylar rushed forward as Bradford collapsed, his face contorted in agony. Call an ambulance, Mitchell shouted, loosening Bradford's tie as he helped lower him to the floor. Autumn stood frozen, watching the chaos unfold. The man she had spent years wondering about, the father she had only just confirmed, was now fighting for his life at her feet. Vanessa pulled out her phone with shaking hands while Tyler stood paralyzed, the implications of Mitchell's revelations dawning on him. His crimes exposed, his plans unraveling, his future crumbling before his eyes. As paramedics rushed into the study, the party guests outside remained oblivious, the orchestra playing on while champagne flowed freely. Inside the room, however, decades of secrets and lies had finally collapsed under their own weight, leaving destruction and uncertainty in their wake. The medics worked frantically to stabilize Bradford, loading him onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him out, his hand shot out, grasping Autumn's wrist. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't know. Then his eyes rolled back. His hand went limp, and the paramedics rushed him away, leaving the fractured family behind to face the consequences of truths too long buried. The hospital waiting room felt like limbo, a sterile purgatory where time seemed suspended. Skylar sat with her head in her hands while Mitchell paced the length of the room, his phone pressed to his ear as he updated the company board members. Autumn stood by the window, staring at the city lights below, feeling like an intruder in this family crisis. Tyler and Vanessa had been conspicuously absent since Bradford's collapse, the moment the ambulance doors had closed. They'd slipped away from the party, avoiding the questions and the scandal that would inevitably follow. Family of Bradford Sterling. All three heads snapped up as a doctor in surgical scrubs approached. His face was grave, his eyes tired behind wire-rimmed glasses. I'm his daughter, Skylar said, stepping forward. "These are family friends," she added, glancing at Mitchell and Autumn. The doctor nodded. "Mr. Sterling suffered a severe myocardial infarction, a heart attack. We've stabilized him for now, but there are complications. His heart sustained significant damage, and during our procedures, we discovered another issue. His bone marrow is showing abnormalities consistent with myelofibrosis. In English, please," Skylar requested, her voice tight with worry. "It's a bone marrow disorder that affects blood cell production. Given the stress his body is under from the heart attack, this complication is particularly concerning. He'll need a bone marrow transplant, and soon." Skylar's face paled. "What are his chances without it?" The doctor's expression softened with compassion. 6 months, maybe less. With a successful transplant and proper cardiac rehabilitation, he could have years. "I'll get tested," Skylar said immediately. "I'm his daughter. Direct relatives are usually the best matches." The doctor agreed. "We can test you right away." Mitchell cleared his throat. His son, Tyler, should be tested as well. The doctor nodded. The more potential donors, the better his chances. After the doctor left, Mitchell turned to Autumn. "You should get tested too." Autumn crossed her arms defensively. "Why would I help the man who rejected my mother, who never even looked for me?" "You know that's not true," Mitchell replied, his voice gentle but firm. "Bradford never knew about you until recently. Diana made sure of that." "He could have tried harder to find my mother," Autumn insisted, tears threatening. He did," Mitchell interrupted. "For months after Lily disappeared, he hired private investigators. Diana intercepted their reports, paid them to tell Bradford they'd found nothing. When he finally gave up, it nearly destroyed him." Autumn turned back to the window, conflicted emotions warring within her. This man, her biological father, had failed her mother, failed to be there when Autumn needed him most. Yet according to Mitchell, he'd been deceived, manipulated, kept in the dark about her very existence. Skylar approached, placing a gentle hand on Autumn's shoulder. "No one's saying you owe him anything, but this isn't about the past. It's about who you are, who we all are, right now." 3 days later, Bradford awoke in his hospital room to find Autumn sitting in the visitor's chair, reading a book aloud, her finger tracing beneath each word as she practiced the skills Skylar had been teaching her. "Autumn," his voice was barely more than a whisper. She looked up, startled. "You're awake." Bradford tried to sit up, but winced at the pain in his chest. The others. Skylar went to get coffee. Mitchell's handling the company crisis. The press is having a field day with Tyler's situation. Bradford nodded weakly. The test results came back. Autumn's face was unreadable. Skylar isn't a match. Neither is Tyler, though he only got tested after Mitchell threatened to go public with the embezzlement evidence immediately, rather than handling it internally first. "And you?" Bradford asked, his eyes searching her face. Autumn stood and moved to the window. "I'm a match. The doctors said it's almost perfect. Better than they typically see even between siblings." Bradford closed his eyes, emotion washing over his face. "You don't have to do this." "I know." Autumn turned to face him. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Because Beverly raised me to be better than those who hurt us." Bradford opened his eyes, a single tear tracking down his weathered cheek. "You're so much like her. Like Lily. She had that same quiet strength." Autumn sat on the edge of the bed, her posture stiff. "Tell me about her, my mother. Not the sanitized version you tell yourself, but the truth. I need to know who she really was to you." Bradford's gaze drifted to the ceiling, back to a time before empire building consumed him. Lily was fearless. Not in a showy way. She just didn't let fear stop her. She had dropped out of school to care for her grandmother, but she read voraciously, anything she could get her hands on. That's how we connected at first. I'd find her in the library after her work was done, reading my first editions of Steinbeck and Fitzgerald. He continued, his voice growing stronger with each memory. She challenged me, called me out when I was being arrogant or selfish. No one else in my life did that. Not Diana. Not my business partners. They all wanted something from me. Lily just wanted me to be better than I was. But you chose Diana. Autumn said, her voice flat. Your perfect society wife, your business connections. Bradford's face twisted with regret. I was a coward. I told myself I had responsibilities. To the company, to Tyler, who was just a child then. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of the scandal. Afraid of losing what I'd built. By the time I realized what really mattered, Lily was gone. Autumn absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. The transfusion is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The doctor said you'll need to stay in isolation for weeks afterward while your immune system rebuilds. Bradford reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she allowed him to take it. Thank you, Autumn. Not just for this, but for hearing me out, for giving me a chance to explain, even if it doesn't change anything. It doesn't erase the past. Autumn agreed. But Beverly always said holding on to anger only poisons the person holding it. She withdrew her hand gently. I'm not ready to forgive everything, but I'm willing to start from here. The bone marrow transfusion took place the next morning, a daughter's life-saving gift to the father she barely knew. As the medical team extracted Autumn's marrow, she thought of Beverly, whose condition had worsened during the days Autumn had spent at the hospital. The nursing home had called that morning. Beverly was slipping away faster than expected. Skylar sat with Autumn during her recovery, the two women forging a bond that transcended the complicated circumstances of their connection. He wants to move Beverly to a private care facility, Skylar mentioned as she helped Autumn sip water through a straw. The best Alzheimer's specialists in the country work there. Autumn frowned. I can't afford. He's not asking you to, Skylar interrupted. He's asking you to let him do this one thing, not as payment, but as acknowledgement of her role in your life, of everything she did when he couldn't. Autumn's eyes filled with tears. I don't want his money. It's not about money, Skylar said softly. It's about giving Beverly the care she deserves in her final days. And maybe giving Bradford a chance to thank the woman who raised his daughter when he didn't even know she existed. As Autumn nodded her reluctant agreement. Neither woman noticed Tyler watching through the glass door of the recovery room, his face twisted with resentment and fear as he witnessed the growing bond between the half-sisters, and the further erosion of his place in the Sterling legacy. The private care facility resembled a luxury resort more than a medical institution. Nestled on 10 manicured acres in Connecticut, Serenity Gardens featured private suites, a staff-to-patient ratio that ensured personalized care, and specialists in neurodegenerative diseases who pioneered cutting-edge treatments. Autumn felt out of place as she signed the admission paperwork, acutely aware that a single day's care here cost more than her monthly rent. But Bradford had insisted, arranging Beverly's transfer while he remained in hospital isolation following his bone marrow transplant. Mrs. Hayes, a kind-faced nurse, approached. We've settled your mother in her suite. She's having a good morning, more lucid than we expected given her records. Autumn followed the nurse through sunlit corridors adorned with soothing artwork. They stopped at a door labeled Beverly Hayes in elegant script. Inside, Beverly sat in a plush armchair by a window overlooking gardens bursting with spring blooms. The transformation from her cramped apartment was jarring, from the medical equipment discreetly integrated into the decor to the fresh flowers on the bedside table. Mom, Autumn called softly. Beverly turned, her roomy eyes widening with recognition. Autumn, where have you been, sweetheart? They brought me to this hotel, but wouldn't tell me why. Autumn sat beside her, taking Beverly's fragile hand. It's not a hotel, Mom. It's a special care facility. The best doctors for your condition are here. Beverly's brow furrowed. We can't afford this place. It's taken care of, Autumn assured her, choosing her words carefully. I found my birth father. He wanted to help. Something flickered in Beverly's eyes, a momentary clearing of the fog that had increasingly clouded her mind. Bradford, she whispered. You found Bradford. Autumn stared in shock. You remember him? Beverly patted Autumn's hand. Of course I do. Lily loved him so much. Too much, maybe. Her voice strengthened with sudden clarity. Is he good to you? Does he treat you like you deserve? He's trying, Autumn answered honestly. He didn't know about me, Mom, all these years. He didn't know. Beverly's eyes filled with tears. I should have told him. After Lily died, I should have taken you to him. But I was afraid he'd take you away. Or worse, reject you. I couldn't bear the thought of you being hurt like that. You did what you thought was best, Autumn assured her. You gave me a good life. Not the life you deserved, Beverly insisted, a familiar stubbornness surfacing. You should have had opportunities, education. Instead, you had to drop out to take care of me. I wouldn't change a thing, Autumn said firmly, meaning it. You were always there for me. Always. Beverly's gaze drifted to the window. Is he coming, Bradford? He's in the hospital right now. He had a heart attack and other complications. Autumn hesitated. I donated bone marrow for a transplant. We're a match. Beverly's attention snapped back, her eyes suddenly sharp. Blood will tell, she murmured. I always said it. Your blood always knew who you belonged to, even when your mind didn't. A soft knock interrupted them. Autumn turned to see a tall, thin man in a wheelchair being pushed by a nurse. Mr. Sterling insisted on coming, the nurse explained apologetically. The doctors advised against it, but he was persuasive. Bradford looked gaunt, his normally commanding presence diminished by illness and the sterile hospital gown visible beneath his robe. Yet his eyes were alert, fixed on Beverly with an expression Autumn couldn't quite read. May I come in? He asked, his voice hoarse but steady. Autumn looked to Beverly, who nodded, sitting straighter in her chair as if preparing to receive royalty. The nurse wheeled Bradford in, positioning him across from Beverly before discreetly withdrawing. Autumn stood, uncertain whether to stay or go. Please stay, Bradford said, sensing her hesitation. If that's all right with both of you. Beverly studied Bradford, her head tilted slightly. You got old, she declared, with the blunt honesty of the very young or the very ill. A surprised laugh escaped Bradford. Yes, I did. But I recognize those eyes, Beverly continued. Autumn has them too. I used to see Lily in her face, but those eyes, those are pure Sterling. Bradford nodded, emotion making it difficult to speak. Ms. Hayes, Beverly, I came to thank you for raising my daughter when I couldn't, for giving her a home, a family. I did it for Lily, Beverly replied, and for Autumn, not for you. I understand that, Bradford acknowledged, and I'm grateful nonetheless. Beverly's gaze turned distant, focused on something only she could see. Lily was so afraid when she found out she was pregnant, not of having the baby, but of losing everything. Her job, her home, you. Bradford leaned forward. If I had known, would you have left your wife? Beverly interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp. Acknowledged a child born to a housekeeper, been willing to weather the scandal? Bradford's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, Beverly nodded sadly. That's why I never sought you out after Lily died. Autumn deserved better than to be your shameful secret. The brutal honesty hit Bradford like a physical blow. Autumn watched him absorb Beverly's words, expecting anger or denial. Instead, he reached into his robe pocket, producing a small, worn leather journal. Mitchell found this among Diana's things after she died, he explained. Her private diary, she wrote about confronting Lily, threatening her, forcing her to leave without telling me about the baby. His hand trembled slightly. I was a coward in many ways, but I would have done right by Lily and our child if I had known. Beverly studied him, then slowly extended her hand. Bradford placed the diary in her palm. Read it, he urged. You deserve to know the whole truth. As Beverly opened the diary, a photograph slipped out. A young Lily Hayes, her smile radiant, standing in the gardens of the Sterling mansion. Beverly's breath caught. She was so beautiful, she whispered, tears spilling down her wrinkled cheeks. My sweet girl. Autumn knelt beside Beverly's chair, her own eyes wet. For long minutes, the three of them remained in silence, connected by the memory of a woman who had touched all their lives profoundly. Eventually, Beverly closed the diary and looked up at Bradford. I forgive you, she said simply. Not for Lily's sake or even yours, but for Autumn's. Carrying anger only poisons the carrier. She turned to Autumn, her eyes suddenly urgent. My closet, at home. Behind the photo albums is another box. Lily's journals. I've kept them all these years. You should have them now, both of you. Autumn nodded, making a mental note to retrieve them. And Bradford, Beverly continued, her voice growing fainter. Take care of our girl. She deserves the world. I promise, Bradford answered solemnly. Beverly smiled. seeming satisfied. Her eyes drifted closed, the momentary clarity fading as quickly as it had come. "I'm tired now," she murmured. "So tired." The nurse returned, explaining that Beverly needed rest. As they left her room, Autumn noticed Bradford looking back at the diminishing figure in the armchair, a woman who had shaped his daughter's life while he remained ignorant of her very existence. "Thank you for coming," Autumn said quietly as they walked the corridor together. "It meant a lot to her, to both of us." Bradford nodded, unable to speak past the emotion constricting his throat. In Beverly's clear-eyed forgiveness, he had glimpsed a path forward, a chance at redemption he wasn't sure he deserved, but would spend his remaining years trying to earn. 3 days later, Beverly Hayes passed peacefully in her sleep, Autumn holding one hand and Bradford the other, a family united too late for one generation, but perhaps just in time for the next. The Sterling Enterprises boardroom fell silent as Mitchell Cooper finished his presentation. On the large screen behind him, transaction records, offshore account numbers, and damning email exchanges painted an irrefutable picture of Tyler Sterling's systematic theft from the company coffers. In summary, Mitchell concluded, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment, over the past 6 years, approximately $27 million has been diverted to cover Mr. Tyler Sterling's gambling debts and personal expenses. The board members exchanged glances, shock and anger evident on their faces. Bradford, still pale but determined, sat at the head of the table, though medical advice had been to remain at home. He had insisted on being present for this reckoning. "Where is Tyler now?" asked Eleanor Chen, the longest-serving board member. "We don't know," Bradford admitted. "He hasn't been seen since he was notified of this emergency meeting. And the authorities." Another board member leaned forward. Mitchell adjusted his glasses. "I've prepared all documentation for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. However, before proceeding with criminal charges, Mr. Sterling wanted to consult with the board, given the potential impact on the company's reputation and stock value." A heated discussion erupted, with opinions divided between immediate legal action and handling the matter internally to minimize negative publicity. Bradford raised a hand, silencing the debate. "I appreciate your concerns for the company, but this goes beyond business. This is about integrity." His voice, though weakened by his recent health crisis, carried the weight of decades of authority. "My son committed crimes, serious ones. He will face the consequences." As the meeting adjourned, Bradford remained seated, exhaustion etched on his face. Mitchell stayed behind, gathering his materials. "You did the right thing," Mitchell offered quietly. Bradford nodded. "Not just about Tyler, about everything." He looked up at his oldest friend. "I've had a lot of time to think in that hospital bed, about the kind of man I've been, the kind of father." Mitchell sat down beside him. "Bradford, no, let me finish." Bradford straightened in his chair. "I've made decisions based on appearances, on wealth, on power. But what did it get me? A son who became a thief, a wife who lived a lie, decades without the woman I truly loved." He paused, grief momentarily overwhelming him, "and a daughter I never knew existed." "You can't change the past," Mitchell reminded him gently. "No," Bradford agreed, "but I can damn well change the future." Across town, in a luxury hotel suite, Vanessa Monroe paced anxiously while Tyler downed his third scotch of the afternoon. "They'll freeze all the accounts," she warned. "We need to move quickly." Tyler laughed bitterly. "It's already done. Everything's gone. Offshore accounts emptied. The money's disappeared into thin air." Vanessa stared at him, blood draining from her face. "What are you talking about?" "Someone got there first," Tyler spat. "Every account, cleaned out. Must have happened right after Mitchell confronted me." "That's impossible," Vanessa whispered. "No one knew about those accounts except—" A knock at the door interrupted her. Tyler tensed, then relaxed when the peephole revealed a hotel employee. "Mr. Sterling, I have a package for you." Tyler opened the door, signed for the envelope, and closed the door again. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a screenshot of an email with Tyler's offshore account information being sent to the FBI, time-stamped 30 minutes ago. "We're screwed," Tyler muttered, showing Vanessa the paper. "Someone just sent everything to the feds." Vanessa's mind raced. They needed leverage. Something to negotiate with. What about company secrets? She suggested desperately. Proprietary information we could sell to competitors. Tyler's eyes lit up. The Sterling Tech Division has been developing a new AI system. It's revolutionary. Worth billions. I have access to the research if we can get it to Meridian Industries. Call them, Vanessa urged. Set up a meeting. As Tyler reached for his phone, neither noticed the small red light blinking on the lamp beside them. The recording device Skylar had planted earlier that day when she'd visited under the pretense of trying to help her brother in a small coffee shop near Central Park. Autumn sat across from Skylar, both women exhausted from Beverly's funeral the previous day. The recording device is working, Skylar confirmed, checking her phone. Every word they say is being transmitted to my secure server. Autumn shook her head in disbelief. I still can't believe Vanessa helped him steal all that money. I don't think she did, Skylar replied. But she's definitely helping him now, trying to sell company secrets to stay afloat. Autumn sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Why are you doing this? Tyler is still your brother. Skylar's expression hardened. Half-brother. And he's been trying to push me out of the company since I reconciled with Dad. Tyler doesn't care about family. Only money and power. And you, Autumn asked softly. What do you care about? Skylar's face softened. Making a difference, my literacy program. The people we help. She hesitated. And family. Real family. Based on love and trust, not just DNA. Autumn's phone buzzed. A text from Bradford. Meeting with lawyers tomorrow. Want to make things official. Your choice. Skylar noticed her frown. Dad. Autumn nodded. He wants to legally recognize me as his daughter. And you're not sure you want that. It feels complicated. Autumn set down her phone. For 28 years, I was Autumn Hayes. Beverly's daughter, now suddenly I'm supposed to be a Sterling. You can be both, Skylar suggested. That's what I did. I used Sterling for legal documents, but professionally I'm Skylar Clark. My mother's name, my identity, my choice. Autumn considered this. I don't want his money. Then don't take it, Skylar said simply. Dad respects independence. Tell him what you do want. Before Autumn could respond, Skylar's phone chimed. She checked it, her eyes widening. They're meeting Meridian Industries tonight, with stolen research data. We need to tell Mitchell, Autumn decided, already texting him. Skylar's fingers flew across her phone screen. This is the final nail in Tyler's coffin. That evening, Tyler and Vanessa sat in a private dining room at an upscale restaurant, nervously awaiting the Meridian Industries representative. When the door opened, they were shocked to see Mitchell Cooper enter instead, followed by 2 FBI agents. Tyler Sterling, one agent began. You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and attempted corporate espionage. As the agents read Tyler his rights, Mitchell approached Vanessa. You have a choice, he said quietly. Cooperate now and return the engagement ring Bradford gave you, or face charges as an accomplice. Vanessa hesitated only briefly before slipping the 5-carat diamond from her finger. I never loved him anyway, she said coldly, dropping the ring into Mitchell's palm. As the agents led Tyler away, Mitchell noticed Bradford standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on a cane but standing tall. Their eyes met, decades of friendship allowing unspoken communication. This chapter of betrayal was closing. A new one was beginning. The next morning, Bradford sat in his home office with his lawyers, signing document after document. Some removed Tyler from his positions within Sterling Enterprises and froze his assets pending trial. Others created the Lily Hayes Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million, dedicated to adult literacy programs and support for single mothers. When the lawyers finally left, Bradford found Autumn waiting in the hallway. You didn't join us, he observed. I needed time to think, she replied, about what I want. Bradford gestured toward his office. Come in, please. Inside, Autumn stood before the desk where generations of Sterling men had built their empire. I don't want your money, she began, or your name, or a position in your company. Bradford nodded, unsurprised. What do you want, Autumn? A relationship, she said simply. A chance to know my father, and your help establishing a scholarship fund in Beverly's name for adult learners returning to education. Bradford's face softened with emotion. Consider it done. "And one more thing," Autumn added. "The restaurant where we met, Lumiere, I want to buy it. Turn it into a space where literacy classes can be held at night for service workers who can't attend regular programs." Bradford studied her, this remarkable young woman who had his determination but none of his ruthlessness. Lily's compassion but stronger boundaries. "You truly are the best of both of us," he said softly. "Your mother would be proud." For the first time, Autumn didn't flinch at the mention of Lily. Instead, she smiled. "I think both my mothers would be proud." 6 months after Bradford Sterling's heart attack, Lumiere Restaurant had undergone a remarkable transformation. The once exclusive dining establishment now featured a spacious reading room where the private dining area had been, walls lined with bookshelves instead of expensive wines. During the day, it still functioned as an upscale restaurant, but evenings saw it filled with service industry workers improving their literacy skills. Autumn stood at the entrance, surveying the space with quiet pride. Though Bradford had offered to purchase the restaurant outright, she had insisted on a partnership, his capital combined with her vision and management. Tonight marked the official opening of the Lillian Beverly Learning Center, housed within the restaurant that had changed the course of so many lives. Nervous, Skylar appeared beside her, clipboard in hand. "A little," Autumn admitted. "What if no one comes?" Skylar laughed. "We have a waiting list 50 names long." "And look," she gestured to the street outside where people were already gathering. Despite the early hour, the transformation in Autumn herself was as remarkable as that of the restaurant. No longer the hesitant waitress struggling to pronounce menu items, she moved with confidence, her reading skills having improved dramatically under Skylar's continued tutelage. She had kept her maiden name, Hayes, but had accepted Bradford's offer to legally recognize her as his daughter, finding a middle ground that honored both her past and her future. "Ms. Hayes," a young woman approached, her waitress uniform visible under her coat. "I'm Sophia. I signed up for the program, but I'm not sure I belong here." Autumn recognized the uncertainty in Sophia's eyes, the same doubt she had carried for years. "Everyone belongs here," she assured her, "whether you're just starting to learn or building on existing skills." Sophia fidgeted with her name tag. "It's just, I've been hiding it for so long, pretending I can read better than I can, making excuses when customers ask me to explain menu items. I know exactly how that feels," Autumn said gently. "I was a waitress here when this was just Lumiere. I couldn't pronounce Taketsuru pure malt and got humiliated for it." Sophia's eyes widened. "Really, but you're so—" "I had help," Autumn explained. "People who believed in me. Now I want to be that person for others." As more students arrived, Skylar directed them to different tables based on their skill levels. Mitchell Cooper made an appearance, officially representing the Lily Hayes Foundation. Though everyone knew his presence was personal rather than professional. At 70, he had stepped back from day-to-day operations at Sterling Enterprises, but remained a guiding force in the Foundation's work. Bradford himself arrived last, still walking with a cane but looking healthier than he had in years. The bone marrow transplant had been successful, though his recovery remained ongoing. At his side was Emma, the no-nonsense nurse who had overseen his home care and had recently become something more. A relationship that surprised everyone, especially Bradford himself. "Quite the turnout," Bradford observed. Surveying the crowded space, Autumn nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions at seeing her biological father. Their relationship had evolved slowly over the months, tentative steps toward trust, hindered occasionally by the weight of the past, but propelled forward by their shared hope for the future. "We're ready to begin, if you'd like to say a few words," Autumn suggested. Bradford shook his head. "This is your night, Autumn, your vision." Emotion welled in her throat at his deference. 6 months ago, Bradford Sterling would have commanded the room without a second thought. Now, he understood when to step back. Autumn took her place at the front of the room, nervousness fluttering in her stomach. Public speaking had never been her strength, but these people, adults taking the brave step to improve their lives, deserved her courage. "Welcome to the Lily and Beverly Learning Center," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "This center is named for 2 remarkable women, my birth mother, Lily Hayes, who died bringing me into this world, and my adoptive mother, Beverly, who raised me with love and sacrificed everything to give me opportunities." She gestured to the wall where photographs of both women hung side by side. Both of them understood what many of us here know too well, that literacy isn't just about reading words on a page. It's about dignity, about independence, about having a voice in a world that often tries to silence those it deems unworthy. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. "I stand before you today as someone who spent years hiding my struggles with reading, ashamed, feeling less than. But the truth is, literacy isn't a measure of intelligence or worth. It's a skill, like any other, that some of us haven't had the opportunity to fully develop." Autumn pointed to the bookshelves lining the walls. "Those books aren't just decorations. They're promises. Promises that we can all learn, at any age, if given the chance and the support." She smiled at Skylar, who nodded encouragingly. "And thanks to the Lily Hayes Foundation and our incredible teaching staff, that support is now available to all of you, free of charge." As applause filled the room, Autumn noticed Sophia sitting near the front, eyes bright with unshed tears and hope. The young waitress reminded her so much of herself, the self she had been just 6 months ago, before a chance encounter had upended her carefully constructed world. After the formal portion of the evening concluded, and the students broke into their assigned groups, Autumn found a moment alone in what had once been the restaurant's wine cellar, now converted into a quiet reading room. She removed the gold medallion from around her neck, the one with the initials B.S. that had once belonged to her mother, and held it in her palm. "You would be proud, I think," she whispered to Lily's memory, "of what's happening here, of who I've become." She felt, rather than heard, Bradford enter the room behind her. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said quietly. Autumn turned, closing her fingers around the medallion. "Just having a moment." Bradford nodded in understanding. "I do that too sometimes." "Talk to her." He moved closer, his steps measured and careful. "I have something for you, a gift for tonight." He pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it to her. Inside, Autumn found a legal document. The deed to the building that housed Lumiere and the Learning Center transferred entirely to her name. "I don't understand," she said, looking up at him in confusion. "We agreed on a partnership. Consider it my graduation gift," Bradford explained. "Skylar told me you passed your GED exams last week with honors." Autumn blinked back tears. She had kept the exams secret, wanting to prove to herself that she could succeed on her own merits. "This place should belong fully to you," Bradford continued, "to honor Lily and Beverly in your own way, without my shadow over it." Autumn studied the man before her, still imposing despite his illness, still powerful despite his missteps, but changed too, humbled, perhaps even redeemed. "Thank you," she said simply. Later that evening, as students worked with their tutors, Autumn noticed Sophia struggling with a passage, her frustration evident. A well-dressed male patron at a nearby table, one of the few regular diners who had stayed to observe the center's opening, made a dismissive comment just loud enough to be heard. "Can't even read a simple paragraph. How do these people function?" Sophia flushed with shame, her pencil trembling in her hand. Before Skylar could intervene, Autumn crossed the room, standing tall beside Sophia. "Everyone deserves a second chance to learn," she stated firmly, meeting the man's surprised gaze. "And everyone deserves to be treated with respect during that journey." The man had the grace to look embarrassed. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," Autumn countered, her voice level but firm. "But that's okay. We all have opportunities to learn and grow. Some of us are just honest enough to admit it," as the man mumbled an apology and quickly paid his bill. Autumn sat beside Sophia. "Don't let anyone make you feel small for trying to grow," she advised, opening the book to the challenging passage. "Now, let's tackle this together." From across the room, Bradford watched his daughter, strong, compassionate, unbroken despite everything life had thrown at her. In her, he saw the legacy that would outlast his buildings, his fortune, his name, a legacy of healing, of second chances, of wounds transformed into bridges toward a better future. The cycle was complete.